I'm Eric Bricker, and I've been a psychotherapist for over 25 years. One thing I can tell you for certain is that no one makes it through life unscathed. At some point, many of us will rely on the trusted counsel of another person to help us navigate difficult times, or to reconcile a troubled past. Whether conventional or unconventional, professional or informal, there are a lot of different forms that helping relationships can take. This podcast is an exploration into what makes these relationships work. Who are the people that help us? How do they help us? What do people need help with? My hope is to uncover as much as I can about this very human phenomenon, and I hope that you'll join me. This is the Good Counsel Podcast. I'm Eric Bricker, and this is the Good Counsel Podcast, and I am joined today by therapist extraordinaire, Adam Saslov. Adam and I started out in the field of behavioral health care together. We worked in some agencies together along the way. We are both here in private practice at the Sanctuary Suites right here in Boca Raton, Florida, or as most people know it, the House of Legends. All right. I don't know that most people call it that, but that's what we call it. And by we, I mean me and Adam. So anyway, Adam, thank you for joining me. It's been long awaited. I'm excited that you've come to talk to me on this thing, and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Welcome to this place where the magic happens.
Right. Exactly.
All right. So, hey, I got a question for you.
Sure.
What has kind of snuck up on me over the last couple of years is that you and I have achieved elder statesman status.
I think we have.
I find that we're being referred to in those terms, people referring to us as like OGs and things like this. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm experiencing the same thing with some of the therapists around here, and even some of the luncheons or trainings I go to. You know, I get introduced as one of the OGs. Part of me feels gratitude towards that, and part of me feels like, wow, we're getting older. I remember when we were in the field, and there were the guys that were older than us that we looked up to.
I have pictures of us working at the National Recovery Institute in like the late 90s, probably like 99 or something, and we do look like children.
Yeah, we do.
There's a picture of us sitting at a lunch table or something. And yeah, we look like little kids.
Yeah. Yeah, we've survived.
As far as the OG thing, or, you know, the elder statesman status that we are occupying currently, here's the thing, like, I'm comfortable with it because it's a lot better than being referred to as like a washed up old hack, you know, because
Right.
That's another
Right.
possibility. Like, hey man, you've been at it for too long.
Right.
So at least we're not getting that.
No, not at all.
So yeah, we're elder statesman status.
Yeah, I guess it feels good. How does it feel to you?
It's hard to think of it that way. I'm a person who's like real uncomfortable with compliments, especially if they're said with a lot of people around. I think I'm much more at home and comfortable when people are berating me.
Right.
You know?
Right.
Just feels more like
Sure.
home.
Sure.
No, that's wrong. That's wrong. It's a little bit weird, but it makes sense because our behavioral healthcare community really is something more like a community in that there are all of these treatment centers here, and it's a lot of people because it's an industry, but it's a small world at the same time. And a lot of people that were behavioral health techs or even patients at programs that we worked at years ago are now established professionals with private practices or people who are upper management in agencies. So they look at us as people that were working in these programs or working in private practices or even having worked with them back at those times. And that's how we are seen.
Yeah, I agree. I still love it though. I remember wanting to do this when I was an intern in the early 90s, and I still love it today. Do you still love it?
Yeah, I do. It's gratifying. I think being in private practice is gratifying. Sometimes you fall into a routine of it, and every now and again, I'm awakened by this idea of, I cannot believe that these really smart and capable people, and these people, many of whom have lived very interesting lives or are just really interesting people, and they're like coming to me as their therapist. Because when you go back all that time and you're trying to cut your teeth in these agencies and you have different jobs, I've been a case manager, I've been a behavioral health tech, I was
Same. Same, yeah.
the detox counselor at a couple of
Right.
places. You wonder, is this ever going to lead to this other thing where I'm a private practitioner and I get to have my own office with my own name and people coming to see me? Am I ever going to be able to practice in this classic psychotherapy way? And it's happened, and, on a consistent level for years now. And it's weird to think that there was ever a time that it wasn't happening. And it's also equally odd to recognize that it has happened.
Yeah, I agree. I have a few interns at any given time in the last 15 plus years, 20 years. I've worked with interns and they're always asking, like, can I really do this? Or I can't wait to do what you're doing. And I remember being in their position thinking like, wow, one day I may have an office, or one day I may be running a group. One day I may be able to help people. And then, you get people from all different aspects of life, and they come in here and you're like, wow, I'm actually working with this type of person, or I'm working with this type of person. So yeah, I still find it exciting, and I'm very grateful that, people are still willing to come see us.
Yeah, me too. I feel that way, and I'm grateful that I get to do the thing I like to do for a living. I think that that's so important. And I remember along the way, when you're a kid, when you're going to college, you hear older people say things like, it's really important to do what you love to do, or it's really important to like your work because you're going to be spending more time at work than you will be spending with your family. Or if you love your work, then you never feel like you're working, and, all of these different things, some of which are kind of corny, but it's true. I'm grateful that I get to do a job that I really like. And it would be, because I've had jobs that I didn't like, and it would be a bummer to be years and years at something that made me miserable.
Yeah, and I think the countertransference that comes up at times for me is when I'm working with a client who is either of means and prominence or who isn't, but either way, they don't like what they're doing, and they come in to process that, to be able to look at what changes they can make in their life, or how they've gotten to this place in their life, and they feel stuck, or they're just not enjoying it. And I think it's at those times even more so, those brief glimpses that you have of yourself, when you're providing therapy to somebody, to say, wow, I really am fortunate that I get to do what I enjoy doing.
We work in a community that's very affluent. And if you work in private practice as a psychotherapist and you are skilled at your job, you're going to be working with people of exceptional means, just a thing that happens. And it has surprised me over the years how oftentimes that doesn't necessarily correlate with a great deal of happiness. Or that even the gratification that a lot of super affluent people get, it's not necessarily from their work. Maybe it's more from family or other freedoms and things that they get to do. But I've also seen this other side of it where it can be a trap for people.
Right.
Where once you accumulate a certain amount of affluence and wealth, it doesn't necessarily translate into freedom, because, more money, more problems kind of thing. And I think for some folks that's real. And once you've attained a certain status and you have people relying on you and they're living a certain status, so you've got a family or whoever or employees that are relying on you to maintain at this level, you can kind of get trapped into it, where it's like, okay, I've attained this level and now I got to keep this level because all these people are relying on me.
Yeah.
And if you're not happy doing what you're doing, and then there's this enormous pressure, that's a hell of a lifestyle.
Yeah.
I've seen that too, I guess.
Yeah, same.
So it's interesting how across the board, different people's jobs, whether you're the CEO of something and, a multimillionaire, or you're just a regular guy that has a salary and a home, those people have more in common than at times I think we might be disposed to think.
And I think the gratitude that comes up for me also is that I found something that I enjoy. and I still enjoy it. I think, as long as we stay healthy, this is something you and I could do forever, part-time or on some level. It's not a job where we ever really have to retire from. We could work, a few hours a week in our retirement years, obviously to keep our minds sharp and healthy, give us purpose later on. Fortunate that I found something that I really enjoy, and I wish other people the same. And I know it's very hard.
Yeah, it's funny. I grew up, my father was a retail executive, and I think at times he really liked his work, and I think at times he did not like his work.
Right.
And when he got towards the end of it, all the traveling around, all the, kind of being dependent upon like whatever was going on in the economy and whatever corporate buyout was going on with the company that he was working for, you become beholden to all of that and reliant on it. And it really can wear you down over the years. And by the time he hit his 60s, he was really looking to get out. He couldn't wait for it to be over. And conversely, I look at my career, you and I having achieved elder status,
right,
as we pointed out earlier on. And I don't think like that. I really don't imagine a life where I'm not doing something, seeing clients, and probably be something like this, or private practice, maybe a smaller version of what I'm doing now, and still with the podcasts and these things. I hope I'm always getting to do that. I certainly want to.
Yeah, it's fun, keeps our mind working. And I think, again, we're very fortunate. We've worked in treatment centers, and a lot of those treatment centers are no longer around. I'm sure you've experienced it too, working with people who work in treatment, and those treatment centers have been bought and sold or closed down, and they're looking for work. And that's even happened to us. I remember that happened to us at National Recovery, where the doors closed down. I think I got out about 2 weeks before you did.
That was traumatizing.
Yeah, I'm sure.
That was unbelievable. So I know we all have our own experience of it, because it's kind of like, where were you when the lights went out in Georgia,
right,
know? So for me, we were working there. I didn't know. I thought this was a legitimate organization. I didn't have a frame of reference for what other treatment centers did. So to me, it seemed normal. We had patients that were coming from all over the place.
Providing therapy to them?
Yeah, we were providing therapy to them. They were being treated medically. A lot of them were getting sober and coming back and saying great things about the organization. I thought this was just how all treatment centers were. And then one day, a group of uniformed officers and non-uniform law enforcement officials descended upon the building. They looked like the opening credits to Law and Order, the way they
right,
take up like the whole hallway,
right,
and they're just walking down the hallway, and I'm like, oh, what is this? I think someone's in trouble. And the someone was all of us.
right.
And they're like, yeah, everyone has to vacate the building. We have warrants, and we're going to be collecting files and all this kind of stuff. So everybody out. And I'm like, what is going on here? And I'm walking out of the building, and I have my little detox counselor clipboard with me. And that was the clipboard where I had the names of all the detox clients, and I would write little notes on there coming away from rounds of who was going off their detox meds or who was coming out of scrubs and going to join the regular population of clients in the treatment program, advancing to the next level. And I'm walking out the door with my little clipboard, and someone says, where are you going with that? And I'm like, it's my clipboard. And she's like, it's evidence. And she took it from me.
Wow.
Lady took my clipboard, and I knew I was in trouble. So here I am, engaged to be married, thinking just graduated, got a job as a therapist, working at National Recovery Institute. I'm on my way. My life is tracking the way it's supposed to. And now I'm working for an organization that's about to go down the tubes because they're committing insurance fraud. And I'm going to show up to my wedding with all of my wife and in-laws and all my family friends. I'm like, yeah, I work for the fraudulent organization that just got shut down, and I'm going to be unemployed.
Yeah, I was just married, and I just moved down here. I just met you. I was working there a few months. And I guess the warning sign should have been when we weren't getting paid.
That should have been a sign for most people. Most people, that's a sign that there's a problem.
Well, Friday would come, and the managers would take off running, and we'd all say, where the upper people going? Where the management going? They were running to the bank to cash their checks, and we would get there after them, and sometimes our checks would cash or not. And I remember a few of us sitting down talking, saying, I think it's time to go. And I was fortunate enough to get out of there before all that went down.
Yeah, it was still open when I left, but I mean, they were locking it up, and they had already had people coming in from the trustees that were sort of taking over the bankruptcy, because I guess when something goes into bankruptcy court, they appoint these trustees or conservators or something, and they kind of take over the business, and they let you know, yeah, this business is going under, and I'm here to oversee the sale of the furniture and whatever else, and the assets and all that, make sure the owners don't do anything else criminal. And that would like set the place on fire to collect the insurance or whatever it is that they would do. And yeah, that was that. And you know, the funny thing about it that I learned from that was I got a job a couple weeks later, and it really was no big deal at all. I got on with someone kind of right away, and I went to go work for Hanley Hazleton, which at that time was a Hazleton affiliated with Hazleton, Minnesota, this prestigious legacy program. There was an inscribed plaque on the door that was a dedication from Betty Ford herself from the grand opening of the program. It's really prestigious, great program. I went to work there. And the fact that I was coming from this place that got shut down for insurance fraud and that it was in all of the newspapers because there was no internet back then, no one cared. No one was worried about it. I thought this was going to leave a huge black mark on my career and resume and that I wasn't going to be able to get another job. No one cared at all. They're like, yeah, well, it's great. It's an infusing of talent back into the work pool, and we could poach these people, and we need a detox counselor, and you're right here. You've done the job for a year and a half. Yeah, when do you want to start? And I'm like, well, as soon as possible. And
yeah, I got a job for Tenet Health System, Fair Oaks. And within a year, I was laid off of there. They had massive cuts, and I was part of that. First year or two after grad school was a little rough.
You really learn a lot about healthcare. I never thought of behavioral health as being part of healthcare,
right,
and being subject to things like investigations from law enforcement for things like insurance fraud,
layoffs
or corporate sales and all of these different things. But it is a bottom line industry that is for profit, except for the places that are not for profit, which always charge the most money. So I'm not really sure how that works, but because the not-for-profit places are the ones that are the most expensive to go to.
Interesting.
But it is an industry and it is a business. And I think that kind of woke me out of the graduate school stupor that this is all this altruism and all these organizations are here, that we are part of the do-gooders of the world. We are, but they're profitable do-gooders.
Sure.
Profitable altruism, if there is such a thing.
Yeah, they have to pay us, right?
They do.
They need to pay us.
They do have to pay us. They have to pay taxes, or, some of them do. And they have to keep the lights on and service the vans and buy the food for the clients, and especially the hospital-based programs. I think that's a pretty expensive overhead to keep those places going.
And obviously, not to sound like a victim here, I mean, we went through that stuff, but there were a lot of people who went through that. We worked with some great clinicians back then, who were the elders, some great mental health techs that took me under their wings in the early 90s. And they went through it all too. And I guess a lot of people go through this again, which again brings up gratitude that I've, been able to do what I've been doing for so long now.
Yeah, I am grateful for that too, that we work in a region, South Florida, that is I guess they call it the Mecca of Recovery. They have called it the Mecca of Recovery, where there are all of these treatment centers and then ancillary practices and private practitioners and outpatient programs and hospital-based detoxes and all of these different entities that kind of spring off of the industry that create jobs for people like you and myself. So no matter what's going on, there always seems to be a place to work if you are inclined to get a job.
Do you still work with mostly primary substance use disordered clients? What would you say if you don't mind me asking?
It's a mix of people. I'm still part of that world in a sense. I feel like I'm not really the person who's navigating people through early sobriety where the focus is you're coming to me to help you stay sober, more or less. I mean, I do a little bit of that stuff, but I feel like there's better people you could be talking to for recovery coaching.
Younger people.
Yeah, younger people or people who that's the work that they're doing.
Yeah.
Most of the work that I do with the recovering community is usually people in longer term recovery or middle tier recovery, like people who are a year or a couple of years sober that are coming for some kind of trauma therapy or some kind of grief and loss. They're dealing with these sort of next level issues, attachment issues, family of origin stuff, relational, interpersonal relationship issues, things that I more specialize in. That's who's coming here. And a lot of them are part of the recovering community or are recovering people. So there's an overlap there, but it's kind of almost like the next tier of recovery that I'm seeing, people who have been sober for a little bit that are working on other things.
Yeah, interesting. So that's changed.
For me,
Yeah.
That's the great thing about working in behavioral health down here and having worked in all these treatment centers. I think working in addiction recovery gives you such like a wide and vast look because all of these different issues are represented. You will see a large swath of people who are self-medicating due to anxiety disorders. So you have the generalized anxiety, social anxiety, OCD. They're all part of the addiction recovery community. So that's why I kind of flipped that one over to you, because I know you do a lot of OCD, a lot of anxiety. You're working with those populations. You see a lot of trauma people. You see a lot of people who have interpersonal relationship issues, a lot of people dealing with grief and loss, a lot of people who are navigating eating disorders and body dysmorphia and body image issues and all of these different things, people who have primary mental health like severe axis 1, mood disorders and thought disorders and all of these different kinds of things. So it covers the whole gamut and spectrum of issues, overlaps with substance use disorders. So I think for me, what it allowed was an opportunity to narrow in on a specialty within that, find the area that best suits my skill set and home in on that. And that really happened a lot for me at working at Cairn Renaissance when I was given the grief and loss group to do for people who were there primarily for substance use disorders, but also had unresolved grief. And I'm grateful to this day that they had this additional program because it really allowed me to zero in on that and to kind of formulate my thoughts and ideas theoretically and skill-wise about how to work with that population.
Yeah, it's funny how we fall into those areas.
It is.
It's hopefully constantly changing. I think that's what also keeps me anyway, fresh and excited about the field.
When you and I were working together at the Wellness Resource Center, I feel like that's where, for me, and I think for you too, I saw it myself, where the skill set was coming together, because now we'd gotten out of these agencies where there was a lot of case management or, behavioral health sort of where you're doing a lot of didactic lectures and these kinds of things, to where you're forming longer term relationships with clients and the emphasis is on working with them as psychotherapists. You're really fully a psychotherapist more so than any kind of case manager. And I watched you evolve in that in a way that a lot of times really impressed me. Yeah, and I'll tell you what it was and you'll laugh. Some of the most difficult people that would come through that, people who are often severely personality disordered, often folks that were pretty evidently borderline, although I'm less disposed to use that terminology now because I think a lot of people that get called personality disordered in their early recovery when they're not fully stabilized psychiatrically, that is a little bit misdirected and premature to be saying that. And ultimately, those people may end up proving to be dealing with some other larger mental health issue or recovery from substance use disorder more so than ever having truly been personality disordered. But back then, they were pretty quick to slap the label on people who were just difficult, thorny people to deal with. And you were so great with those people. And the people that were, I found to be often the most disruptive in group, or people who are just the most defiant or just the most attention seeking and difficult, people who were never satisfied with anything anyone else ever did, they all loved you.
I don't know what that says about me.
Something exceptional, man. That I viewed it as something exceptional. I was slightly jealous, and because I was like, Adam could bond with anybody.
I've always said it, and said this a few weeks ago. One thing I've always looked up to you for, and always envied, is like you're always able to conceptualize a case. And I always called you like the owl. You're this owl in this branch looking down, and you could see everything that's happening instead of coming from what's happening inside of you or just getting into it with the client. But you could look at all the different perspectives and pieces of it. And I took that from you. And I think when we worked together, we did men's group for many years. We were a really good team. And I do remember that coming together for me there. We had Michelle Michael, who was my supervisor, and I called it ER. I still call it Wellness Resource Center. For me, was like working in an ER. We saw everything. And I think I was there for 8 years, and I was the lead therapist and then clinical director. And I learned a tremendous amount because we got to see everything. And we got to see what worked and didn't work. And I learned to slowly do what you do, observe and not react, and just be able to slowly, mirror back to the client what they were doing, but do it in a safe way. Because I think for so long, and a lot of treatment centers I worked at, it was so confrontive, right? And it works for some people, but I think for others, it necessarily didn't. So if I can get them to see that I understand and have compassion for what they're going through, then maybe they're able to like trust me and be able to open up and talk to me. I don't think I recognized that I was doing it then. I think I was just doing it, and I just realized it worked. And I think, like you said, over the years, I was able to conceptualize it and realize I have to be curious and compassionate and not start yelling at them or coming down on them for everything, but saying, look what's happening here. And I think a lot of them trusted me through that. And, a lot of them from almost 20 years ago, every now and then will still send me a little text here or there, tell me they're doing well. Some of them have become therapists themselves. We were like, they're never going to be able to, even make it in life. And they're doing fantastic. Some of them, as you said, are running treatment centers and doing all kinds of great things, became attorneys, physicians. And it was really just, I think, being compassionate and listening and pointing out to them in a very safe manner, this is what you're doing, or can you see what you're doing? And you taught me a lot about reality therapy too, like how's this working for you? But not to come at it from a confrontational way, but to say, look, how is this working for you? In a very loving, caring way, to where they can, calm down. I remember we had this one guy one time, and he was some farmer, and he was big guy, and he was craving crack cocaine. He went out and used, and I think he came back, and he was screaming at the staff. He was in the lobby, and everybody was afraid of him. And I remember walking out. This was one of those moments. I walked out, and he was screaming at me, and big man. And I looked at him very calmly, and I said, hey, look, I'm not talking to you this way. Can you not talk to me this way? And I kind of just treated him, still saying, provide honey, you attract more flies, whatever, bees. And I wanted him to see that I was there for him, and I understood he was really struggling. And he looked at me and he's like, okay, Adam. And we just walked into my office and sat down and spoke. And I wasn't confronting him. I wasn't like showing him, there was no reason to fight with this guy. He was in pain. And to be compassionate and to understand what he was going through, I think I learned that there. And I think I learned that from all you guys too.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. If I would have interrupted you earlier on in that, when you were talking, I would have said that's the beauty of it, is what you said, that you didn't necessarily know that this is what you were doing. You were just kind of intuitively doing it. And I think that's the thing that made you great, was making it appear effortless, because maybe in some way it actually was. You were just doing it. And so when I would see you with some really difficult individual like that pushes all the buttons, where a lot of times people would be thinking like, gee, I just hope this guy just gets out of here. I don't want to deal with this. You're hanging around for a little while longer to find out what's going on behind that. And I also, too, in that place, learned compassion for a lot of those people in a different way than I'd had before, because most of all of this crazy acting out that people do, it's just maladaptive coping, and they're just acting out their own expectations. They come in there assuming this isn't going to work out because nothing ever did and nothing ever does. So the moment things go sideways, it feels very familiar, and they're like, oh, okay, let me just go ahead and blow this up and get myself thrown out of here before I invest all these weeks and months into this process that probably isn't going to work out anyway. And then they are shown some compassion and a pathway back to center by someone who's willing to meet them where they're at and form a relationship with them, even though they're being very difficult. And then that's new. And he has to stop and think about it for a second. And because I think a lot of people in that phase where they're not fully stable and not fully stable from substances, they don't know how to get conflict resolution. They don't know what to do after they've exploded and scorched the earth. They don't have a way back from that. And it's never been demonstrated for them. They've come from families where that didn't really happen a whole lot. And so it gives them an opportunity to have that lived experience of, this is what happens when I lose it, and this is the way back. And then the next time they have a wobble like that, they are more prone to at least have some lived experience of negotiating conflict from the first time and say, hey, you know what? Adam forgave me once. Let's see, let's see if we can have some kind of conversation about this again, because I messed up. And then the second time or third time, you're more inclined to hear them say, yeah, I did this. I messed up, and I'm sorry, and you've been good to me. And
I think you said it earlier, we had the luxury and the beauty of working with these clients for sometimes up to a year. We would see them come in at their worst, and they were oftentimes a mess. Take away the drugs and the alcohol, then we'd get their mood stabilized, and then we'd really get to work on their, like you said, their maladaptive behaviors. But we had the luxury of getting to watch these people grow. And I really did, I always felt it to be an honor to watch these clients grow. And I remember we would do those coin out ceremonies. And those I remember, especially the first 5-6 years, especially when you were there, those coin out ceremonies, when a client would graduate the program, we would pass the coin around and everyone would say something, and we'd have their family members in. And you and I would always try to do something a little special for them, whether to play a song or to offer something, like a picture or something that the clients did. And they almost became a family member, and you got to see these people grow. And I remember many, many, many times in those coin out ceremonies where, there were lots of tears, and we would often walk out and just say, wow, that was awesome. We wouldn't walk out and run and have to go to the next client right away. I remember you and I walking out of those coin outs and taking a breath and saying, wow, that was really cool. Remember how they were? And the reflection and the impact that it would have on the client, the reflection of how they were prior to entering, the Wellness Resource Center and then coming to us. I mean, it was, a phenomenal program back then. I just feel like you, me, some of the other therapists there, we just had the opportunity to really do some work. As Michelle would say to me oftentimes, go try something with them. Try something a little different. There's nothing that you're going to do that we can't fix in here. So we would try a new angle with them, or try a new, motive, or new directive, or different type of therapy. And it was just really, really awesome to see that coin out and see what we did. And then to know when the next person came in, because we were a small program then, when the next person came in, to look at what could be happening, what the outcome could be compared to when they first came in. Oh, here we go. We have another, like you said, borderline client, or another antisocial, another narcissistic person, or this person who just got in trouble and got arrested a few times, or is OD'd or been to detox 17 times. We got to see what the outcome could be because we had them for so long. I think that gave, for me, and I think it gave both of us, because we used to talk a lot then, I think it gave us a lot of hope.
It did, because it was a window of time where the opportunity met the moment for your own potential as a therapist, because we had these owners that we worked for, Michelle Michael and Sharon Carter, who, as you pointed out, they very much encouraged creativity and risk-taking. They like to see that in us. They like to see the investment. And the first question that Michelle would always ask us when a new client was coming in and things were happening and maybe there were some problems, what have you done to bond with this client? Always asking us, are you bonded with them? Did you bond? Did you make the effort to connect with them? This person plays music, or this person, what have you done to try to connect with them? And it really made that a priority, the forming of relationships, about finding some common ground, because there's always something if you're willing to look for it. If you're willing to look beyond the thorniness of the behavior, there's always some human experience that you probably have in common with the person.
Yeah, and if I remember all that's all coming back to me now. And if we couldn't connect with them, oftentimes in a very safe, loving way, what is going on inside of you that you can't connect with them? Because it's not the client, it's stuff that you have going on from your past, your childhood, with your family, whatever that is making you push away or turn away from the client. Yeah, I remember that.
One of the hardest lessons I learned from that whole experience was there were other new therapists that came in there during the period of time we were there. People who were maybe slightly behind us experience level because we had worked there for a little while. And there were a number of them that just didn't make it, that, got cut loose, unfortunately.
Right.
And it sucks to see somebody get, terminated from a job like that because they were hopeful about doing well, and they weren't like completely useless or something. Like some of these people had some skills or knew how to do some things or had some technical ability, right? They made it through graduate school. But I think the thing that Michelle and Sharon both were pretty quick to react to and to be able to pick up on were people who just were not effective in bonding with clients.
I think you're right.
Couldn't find the common ground, couldn't connect. And they just looked at it and they were like, this is never going to be effective. You don't have the internal resources to bring your authentic self to this process and connect with these clients in some kind of way that's going to be meaningful to them. And if you can't do that, what can you really hope for in a therapeutic relationship?
Right. And a few may have slipped through their fingers, but they didn't last long. You're right. You're right. They were very good at picking up on, hey, this therapist is unable to bond for whatever reason, their old transfer and stuff or whatever.
And the really unfortunate thing about that was somehow or other, you were always elected to be the person to comfort the person on the way out the door after they'd been terminated. So they would get terminated and it would be like, Adam, will you just walk them out to the parking lot and collect the keys and all that kind of stuff? That always seemed to be your job.
Yeah, I actually blocked that out as well. I forgot about that. I did.
You remember that now, right?
I do.
Because there was one time when I was watching you walk someone out of the building through the window after this woman just got termed. And I didn't feel good at all. It's an icky feeling, because the person is really upset by what happened. And you put yourself in that position like, damn, if that happened to me, I would feel awful, especially because I was really invested there. I liked that job. So losing it would make me feel the worst.
Yeah.
And I'm watching you walk this lady out into the parking lot and get the keys back from her and all this. And I'm like, wow, that's terrible. And I'm glad I didn't have to do it.
I remember those days.
Yeah. I think that speaks something about you, that you were trusted with those duties that, again, it's difficult. It's not something anyone would want to have to do. And that you were trusted to kind of soften this thing as much as it could be softened under those awful circumstances.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about getting older and being a therapist, and I also look back at the opposite and also look and say there are certain things I don't ever want to do again. I look at some of these phenomenal programs around here. I was talking to John Pulse the other day and his people who own Full Life. They do such amazing work. And I'm like, that's a young man's game. And I look at some of these other therapists too, working in treatment or people coming straight out of treatment. I'm like, that's a young man's game. I don't have the energy or the want to do that anymore.
I felt like that at Karen Renaissance when I worked there, and it was a couple of years, but I'm late into my 40s doing this and working as a primary therapist there, where your day starts at 8:30 in the morning, ends at 7:30 at night. And there's really not much of a break during the day. It's go, 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 because they were operating in such a level of intensity that because of the program itself was all intervention based, you never really took a group off. There was always some thing going on that needed to be dealt with, and the expectation was that you were going to come and deal with it in some meaningful way, and not just, hey, we're going to have a casual discussion about this or that, but that you were going to go in there and that you were going to bring it, and that you were going to bring some level of intensity, maybe challenge somebody on something or get other people to challenge each other on things, that you were going to bring some kind of that energy there. And I'll tell you, a full day of that, one after the other, over the course of months, it really saps you of some energy. And I was watching some of the other therapists who were kind of more in that phase of life that we were in at the Wellness Resource Center, when again, we were kind of operating in that, level, going in there early, staying late, doing, aftercare groups at night, managing crises into 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night sometimes. And they were more that age between 30 and 40 where they were doing these things. And I was thinking like, yeah, that's the right age for that sort of thing. And I am not the right age for that, but I'm definitely the right age for this. So it all kind of worked out the way it needed to, because I don't know how many years of that I had in me.
I don't know anyone who could do that for year upon year, decade after decade. It takes a toll. It just takes a toll. And I think oftentimes therapists burn out and don't even realize what burnout is or what they're going through.
So you remember Vinnie Richards,
sure,
right?
Yeah.
Vinnie Richards he passed away recently, and Vinnie Richards was one of these characters. They don't really exist anymore in the field. They just stopped manufacturing new ones after the 90s, But he was an older guy from New York, and he had that real New York swag to him, and when I say New York, I'm talking about like the garment district of New York he had worked in. So he had that kind of heavy, I'm a knock-around guy from the streets of New York type of energy to him. Slick, quick, and funny, with a little bit of stand-up routine, a favorite of the clients. He had these little routines he would do, and they would love it. He would go into group, and he's like, all right, who's ready to be part of their recovery? He's like, oh my goodness, we got some big names in here, some big names in recovery. And we're like, Josh Johnson from Baltimore is here. And some guy who he just met like the day before would come wandering into the group, and he would call him out like, oh, big names. And they loved the attention, and they made them feel special. And at the same time, it was comedy. And he brought that big energy. So people loved it. And he was that way with the staff too. And I remember he was talking about burnout, because there were a lot of characters that came through the National Recovery Institute. Again, this is the late 90s, and what qualified as a therapist then, it's a little different than what we would call a therapist today.
Yes.
Sometimes, there were some strange people working there, and I will say that. I think it looked really odd to you and me, some of these people, because you and I were products of graduate school, and we were youngsters who were not of the recovery world, were not.
Oh, and they reminded us frequently.
Yeah, they reminded us frequently, and there were a lot of these knock-around characters, from New York and Jersey and older people. And so one day I'm sitting with Vinny outside the center, and we're watching somebody who was one of these characters who had worked like in the outpatient program upstairs, and he was a really bizarre dude. And we're watching him in the parking lot, and Vinny goes, yeah, that's how it starts, right there. First, inappropriate laughter. Then you see them walking around the parking lot talking to themselves. And then one day they're just gone. And it was like, that was his steps to burnout, right?
He was amazing. He taught me a lot of stuff. He just was phenomenal. There's a therapist here, Bill Browning, who Vinny took under his wings, and we still talk about him. And Bill's a therapist now. He's been a therapist for years, and just the story after story. And you have some of the best stories about him. But yeah, we've made some great friends in this field.
Met some fascinating people, man.
Yeah.
My experience, National Recovery Institute alone, some of the people that were there, because this was really some of the first wave of people that came from the Northeast to get treatment here and get sober in South Florida. These are the people who essentially sort of made it the Mecca of recovery. And then they went to work in treatment, and they brought these big personalities. You remember Patty Cox?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Purple Patty.
Fantastic.
Yeah, she was unbelievable.
Brilliant.
And to describe this woman to anybody who didn't know her, first of all, she was a very large, imposing figure. She was probably over 6 feet. I believe she was taller than me. And she was a big woman, and she had this massive shock of like purple hair. It was kind of like an afro-ish. I would say more of a perm than an afro. And it was purple and with streaks of hair that kind of formed these like locks that would come down the side. So it was definitely an unusual look, right? And she had this heavy, heavy New York accent, like the Bronx or Brooklyn or something like that. And she was a smoker, so it was thick. So she had that thick, like, what are you doing sitting in my seat? Get up. Get up right now, like that,
Right.
that kind of thing. She sort of barked at people, but it was okay because, she was her. So, I was just excited that she was talking to me. And somebody had told me, this is unconfirmed, that she was actually a part of roller derby at some point.
I could see
in
that.
the 80s, like riding around.
She was menacing.
Menacing. She's a tough lady. So the idea of her being on roller skates and knocking other women over, it's not hard to picture really at all.
She loved you.
She called me the Ivory Baby.
Did she? She took you under her wing. She really liked you.
For whatever reason, she called me the Ivory Baby, and I didn't know what that meant. So apparently, Ivory Snow laundry detergent from back in the 50s and 60s, there was a box with a little baby on the cover. And it was like a little baby with rosy cheeks on the cover. And I guess to her, that's what I look like.
Right.
My baby face. No one's calling me baby face anymore. Now that I'm in my late 50s. But back then, I guess I just looked like a little kid to her. And she called me the Ivory Baby. And she would say that. Always with an audience, but I didn't care. I was just like, oh my God, this lady likes me and she thinks I'm cool and she's talking to me,
Yeah, I worked the night shift there. I was running the aftercare, remember, the aftercare groups, and she worked most nights. And I got to tell you, with her and a few other techs, I felt completely safe there. There was nothing that was going to happen to me there with them.
Yeah, she was always in charge and they had a lot of reverence for her. She was just a person to be respected. And when you hear her story of recovery, her story of survival, this was a person who was really kind of early on into the methadone, what I would call the methadone experiments of the 1970s, when they started giving it to people and establishing the first methadone clinics as an alternative to heroin and the heroin epidemic of that time. And they weren't giving it to people because they were some humanitarian thing where they were trying to save lives. They were doing it as an initiative to stop crime, or as Patty would say, they opened up methadone clinics in the city because they were tired of seeing us running down the streets with TVs on our backs. That was a quote from her. So
big TVs back then too.
It was a big TV to be running
Not
around
the flat screens
with.
today.
No flat screens,
No.
right? So, it was an alternative to crime. And she was like an early adopter to these methadone clinics back in like 70s. And what people didn't know was that methadone itself is actually far more physically addicting than heroin, even though it's less intoxicating. So you could be on it for a long time feeling like you're doing pretty well because you could be functional, you could work, you could do a lot of things until that day you decide you're going to try to get off it. And once it has a hold on you, the only way, to quote somebody, the only time this ever lets go of anybody is to get a better grip,
Did she kick it?
Yeah, she got sober. She got off
from methadone.
Right. And that was part of her journey to come down to South Florida. She brought like a bottle of methadone with her and used up the last of her methadone and had to kick this big, gigantic methadone habit that she had in order to get clean and sober. And that was part of her story of recovery and why she was held in such tremendous reverence by all of these clients, because she was an OG in NA, Narcotics Anonymous, which to have people with that kind of long-term sobriety, 12 years, 15 years sober from narcotics, that was unusual. So she really provided like an example to people of what was possible for them. And she had this big personality and authority. So she was just like super well respected. But I really value all of those experiences because I didn't know anything about the world of drug addiction and the streets and the history and what went on. And from all these experiences of hanging out with her and people like that worked in that National Recovery Institute, I learned so much. It was like a graduate school education on drug use and the streets and all these different things that people would talk to you about, like the life of prostitution and it just all of these different things that you would learn from other people and their lived experiences. And it was wild.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it really was.
And that's kind of what pulled me in because I had done a few things in behavioral health. Before that, worked in mental health, worked in some group homes, worked in an outpatient clinic, and it was all pretty cool. But it was discovering this whole like Mecca of recovery that really pulled me in because I got caught up in the stories and the drama of it all and the fact that there were these people who came from very far away and had lived really hard lives and were not expected to live very long. And they came in and they got sober and now they were living these excellent lives and helping other people and going on to do really cool things. And I was like, wow, I got caught up in I think the drama of that and the theater of that and just really kind of like the romantic notion of seeing the redemptive power of recovery and therapy and all of this in a way that I hadn't seen in any of the other areas of mental health that I'd been exposed to in like graduate school. So seeing it there and seeing what happened to these people in recovery and knowing that there was a lane for people like you and me to participate, I was like, yeah, I think this is it. And we live in this place where it's all happening all around us. Yeah, just sign me up for that. I'm here.
Yeah, you're right. I worked at Charter Hospital prior to that for I think 4 years, and then moved down here. And working in treatment, the clients were almost always intelligent, creative. You and me being a musician, so many of them were musicians who are skilled and talented musicians, artists, and even, brilliant people. And then you start to realize that addiction has no boundaries. And for so long, because we were getting into the field in the 90s, I think alcoholics and addicts were looked at different than they are today, thankfully. And to start meeting these people and how brilliant they were. And they had this disease that was just kicking their ass.
Stigma.
Yeah.
There was still a lot of stigma then. And that's, I think, one of the things that we've seen movement in during our period of time working in behavioral health. And I guess in that way, you and I both have this kind of like Forrest Gump-like thing where it's kind of you and I were there working in this as different movement occurred in behavioral health, as certain things change. When we were working at National Recovery Institute, the whole idea of dual diagnosis or comorbid treatment or treatment of co-occurring disorders, it has a lot of different names over the years. But the idea that substance use disorders and mental health conditions are connected entities, that treating one and treating the other simultaneously creates a synchronous opportunity for a much better quality recovery, and that it insulates against the likelihood of relapse. All of that was still being contested in a mainstream way in the treatment community. So there were even people that were counselors at National Recovery Institute that were saying things like, if you take Prozac, you're just getting your alcohol in a pill form. People were saying that.
I remember that.
And then you go 5 or 6 years later, and you and I are working in one of the first true comorbid treatment centers in the country.
Wellness Resource Center, yeah.
The Wellness Resource Center, which was called a dual diagnosis program. And we're treating these people in a partial hospitalization level of care, where historically people with these thought disorders and bipolar disorders that were not fully stabilized and were at high risk for relapsing on drugs and just going, just completely going haywire. People like that were going to psychiatric hospitals and staying in them for long periods of time. And we were part of deinstitutionalization that, one, saw the mainstreaming of the treatment of psychiatric disorders within the substance use disorder treatment community and the shutting down of state hospitals and things like this as people were being moved more into, least restrictive environments of care.
And not being an alcoholic or an addict or coming from the field or coming from recovery and coming more from, an educational standpoint and working in the field. Didn't it make sense to you when you went to work for wellness? Didn't it just make sense that, wow, this is what needs to happen? We need to look at these people as a whole and not just as an addict or an alcoholic, but yeah, there's a mood disorder here as well, and maybe a personality disorder, and we can treat all of it. To me, it just was like common sense, and I get we came in to the very beginning of that, so I don't, I wasn't there working in the field in the 80s, but for me it was like, oh, this makes sense.
I had an epiphany moment in that. And it was during my first year working there where there was a kid and actually a couple of people. It wasn't just one, it was a few, but there was one case I'm thinking of in particular where this kid was so psychiatric and so behaviorally maladaptive that he was discharged from a very prestigious residential treatment program in another state. And because even these really highly qualified and competent professionals just could not deal with his behavior. And he was disruptive to the entire program. So they sent him to the Wellness Resource Center. And we got a lot of cases like that. So in he comes and he is psychiatrically unstable. And you're looking at this guy thinking like, well, what's the ceiling for him? Because he was pretty disruptive to us. But we worked with him and, stayed with him and supported him and helped him. And it was intervention after intervention. And he got on medications, the right medications, after a few trial and errors. And then there was the period of time that it took for him to stabilize. And you fast forward like 4 or 5 months, he is a completely different human being. Rational, socially adapted, had friends, was working, had a job, some kind of pathway back to education, different relationship with his family. We were able to discharge him out of our program into transitional housing locally, where he had a much higher level of independence, was able to get himself back and forth to work, take medications independently with minimal supervision. And you see that kind of transformation. And I remember thinking that and thinking anything is possible. And I went from a guy who didn't really understand what possibility was to believing that anything is possible. And when you believe that anything is possible, you approach clients like anything is possible. And I try not to ever forget that, because that was transformation for me. And that was where my bar of what I believed treatment and therapy and all of that, what it could provide for people in terms of transformation of what was possible. And what was possible was that anything was possible. Because if this guy could get from here to here, what can we do with the rest of these people?
Yeah, it was an incredible experience there. It really was. And I think, working with you there, that was one of the highlights there. You and I just had a blast. We used humor and music often with these guys, and we're just able to connect. That was a phenomenal part of my career.
I have one more funny story that I want to share about that. And this is how you know that we're elder statesmen, because now we're sharing all the boring stories, right? Repeating our stories, right. But I don't care. I guess that's the privilege you get of getting to be an elder statesman, is you have stories and you get to tell your stories. So this is one. You and I decided, we had the bright idea that we were going to have a talent show in the dual diagnosis comorbid treatment center. And our clients were at various levels of pathology and stability, I will say. And so I was given the task. It was my thing, and I was going to oversee it. And I was given the responsibility of, overseeing this thing that we were doing. And I'm like, okay, yeah. So I was supposed to vet all of the acts. And I got caught up musically with a couple of clients that were really talented musicians, and we were going to play some songs together. And I just got all caught up in like what songs we were going to play and how to play the songs, and that this kid was going to sing this, and so much so that I just turned my blinders on to everything else. And this one, client was, yeah, I want to do interpretive dance. And you're like, yeah, that's great. That's cool. Oh, you're going to put the sheet on? That looks like fun,
right.
And this other guy's like this schizophrenic dude. He's like, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to play the piano and all this. And I'm like, yeah, that looks cool. All right. Sounds good, man. And somebody else is like, I want to get up and I'm going to tell jokes. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds great. I told me one of the jokes. It was not that funny. Yeah, that's good. You go ahead, do the stand-up. I love it. Looking good. Somebody else was doing a magic act that involved fire.
Right.
And he's like, yeah, I'm going to burn down the building. I'm like, yeah, that's cool, man. We're going to go ahead and play Ventura Highway, And so I took my eye off the ball, so to speak, for this talent show that was happening. And so it's the day of, and the owners of the facility are sitting in the
next to me,
in the front row.
I got the brunt
next to you. And our first two contestants decided that they were going to go up in drag. They borrowed clothing from their female peers and they go up. And now we're looking at the two of them dressed up in women's clothing, which is, whatever. I was like, okay. I mean, I'm not really sure where they're going with this, but this has promise. It's different. Let's see where we're going to go. And they were doing skits, and the skits they decided to do was for their interpretation of a women's hygiene product commercial. And it was graphic and really sort of distasteful, beyond distasteful, not funny. It had low entertainment value, except for the fact that like I'm dead, right? This is over.
Right.
So, and slowly but surely you see the heads turning from the front row
to me.
Yeah, looking at you like, Adam, what the fuck did you guys do here?
Because as your dad used to say, there's a difference between responsibility and accountability, right? And I was accountable for what you were doing, but you were responsible. And like, did you not know Eric was going to allow this to happen? I was like, no, I've been working.
Oh, I was completely responsible. It was a disaster. So the next guy gets up and he's still not stabilized. And this is a guy who I think was probably schizophrenic. And he brought up a little piano, and I was like, oh, wow, this guy's going to play a song. This is cool. He had this little handheld keyboard, and he pressed one of the keys. It made a note, and he just matched the note. And he was like, so he pressed the note and like, ding. And then he's like, la. And then he would press another note and it would be like, ding. And he would be like, la. And he just did that, just going through the keyboard, pressing notes and trying to match.
I thought it was
them.
creative.
It definitely was creative, but it wasn't really going anywhere. And then somebody else got up and told some like bizarre non sequitur jokes that weren't really jokes. And it was just like one disaster.
The magic show, I think, was a disaster too, right?
The magic show was a disaster. This guy got up and he was like an older guy who was like an amateur magician, and he came up with props, and he's like lit a cigarette for something, and I think the trick didn't work, and one of his props actually got set on fire in the building, and the owners of the program were looking at this and they were just like, what is going on? And in the middle of the performance, they got up and walked out.
Grace it was a Friday.
Yeah.
So you had the weekend to get through it.
And it's funny, they got up and walked out, and I know that you were talking to him the whole time, and I knew
I was trying to calm him down.
And I knew it was a disaster. And so when it was all over, I went up to you and I'm like, hey, Adam, did they like it?
Like, well,
what Michelle and Sharon think? Pretty cool, huh?
I think that may have been our last talent show.
It was. I think we had some like modified versions of it, but we didn't invite any guest audience. So we let them be an audience for themselves, and that was a better way to go.
Well, funny enough, one of the cross-dressing couple up there, he was a guy who ended up moving along in life and doing fantastic with his life, and came in really disorganized, and is a guy who still, occasionally will reach out to me and doing great. He may be married with kids now and has probably, my guess, somewhere in his 40s, and doing fantastic.
Yeah, there are a few from that group. I mean, this is going back, 20 years now, but there are a few from that group that I hear about that have gone on to do some pretty exceptional things, just living great lives. And so it does happen. But wow, man, it's been an extraordinary road,
Yeah, it has.
And that's funny. I had no idea what we would end up talking about today, but I figured we have this shared history. There would be something interesting to say. I didn't know that it would take us back into those two things, which I don't always think about all the time.
No, same. And I hope your audience finds it as intriguing and as funny as we did.
Yeah, I hope so. But that was a lot of fun. Well, you know what, man? I think probably we're at close to an hour, so I don't want to run this thing too long because I have to edit all this stuff. But this was a good one, man. And you know what? As we're doing this, there were things I imagined we would be talking about that we didn't even get to. So if you ever want to come back, we can talk about Irving Yalom. We could dive in heavier on the therapy stuff. And we could do whatever. There's so much more stuff we could talk about if you want. So you're like, yeah, I think I'll go ahead and listen to this and see how it sounds, and I'll get back to you on that.
Well, as you know, as I'm in my late 50s, I like to lay a little low these days in the field. And I know you've been asking me for quite some time now to come in. So I do appreciate you being patient and having me come in today.
Oh, yeah. This is a big get. You don't do a lot of public-facing stuff.
Very little.
Yeah, you're like De Niro. He doesn't do a lot of interviews. So I pulled you out from your reclusive...
Well, it did include breakfast, so that helps.
It included
At this age, breakfast is always a bonus.
Yeah. So to get you out of your reclusive, refuge to come out here and greet your audience, that's a special thing. I feel
glad
privileged.
I did.
Yeah, it was fun, man. And if you ever want to, we can always do this again, and we could do other stuff. Probably lots and lots that we could be talking about.
Oh,
here.
Thank you.
So, Adam, little plug action for the end. Tell us a little bit, real quick, specialty work, anything that you would want people to know about your practice.
Yeah. Here's the part I'm not good at. So I'm still practicing.
Do me a favor. Let's dispense with the false modesty. You're pretty good, right?
Thank you.
You're very good at this. You've been doing it for a long time. You're widely respected in the community as a great therapist. So stop with the nonsense and just tell people what you do.
So I still work with addicts and alcoholics, very, very rarely though these days. I've over the last probably 10 years been doing more couples work, using a lot of Gottman stuff, John Gottman out of California, and incorporating my own stuff, which I've gone over some of that with you. That seems to be working. And I work with a lot of people our age these days, who are, getting ready to retire or who are trying to figure out what they want to do in their later middle life crisis. And I still occasionally, I have a handful of kids I work with, are teenagers, and I'm a qualified supervisor. I work with therapists seeking licensure, mental health counselors, and marriage and family therapists. So I'm dual certified for both. And that's about it. That's, I'm still doing my thing and loving it, and still educating myself, still reading. This summer, I'm going to be certified in hypnosis, which I've always wanted to do. So I'm taking a 50-hour course in that. So we'll see where that goes.
All right. So a lot of different things. Adam's a therapist. We've worked alongside a lot over the years. And yeah, I'm grateful to have Adam down the hallway as a resource. We consult on cases all the time. We work together with some families and different things. So that's Adam Saslov. He's a great therapist. If you're in need of one, definitely a good guy to call. I'm pretty good too.
Fantastic. You're fantastic.
And so thank you for joining us, Adam. Adam, if people were to want to get in touch with you, I know you have a website out there somewhere. What's the best way?
So the best way really is to just go on Psychology Today and look up my name. I actually don't have a website right now. Like I said, I really lay low. And they could call you, or feel free to go on Psychology Today and look me up on there or Facebook.
All right. So if you're looking them up on Facebook or you're looking them up on Psychology Today, that's Saslov, Saslov, right? Saslov. All right. So Adam, thank you for joining me. This has been great. And people, it's the Good Counsel Podcast, available at Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts. And I'm also going to be doing some stuff on video. So I'm setting up a YouTube channel. I'm pretty excited for that. And you can find me on Instagram also at Eric Bricker, ericbricker.lmhc, and at my website, ericbrickerlmhc.com. Adam, thank you for coming.